It's 1 a.m. when he threw me out of the house. The cold bit through my thin nightgown as I stood on the porch, my wedding ring still catching the moonlight, while the man who promised to love me forever locked the door behind me. But darling, that wasn't the end of my story. That was just the beginning. Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to Grandma's Corner, where I share the stories that shaped me, broke me, and ultimately made me stronger than I ever imagined I could be. If you're new here, welcome to our little family. And if you've been with me before, it's so good to have you back. Before I begin tonight's story, would you do your old grandma a favor? Hit that like button if you're settling in to listen. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave me a comment telling me where in this beautiful world you're watching from. I love knowing that my voice reaches across cities, countries, and oceans to find you wherever you are. Now, let me take you back to a time when I was young, hopeful, and foolishly believed that love alone could build a life. I met him on a Tuesday. Isn't it funny how the most important days of our lives can start so ordinarily? It was fall of 1968, and I was 22 years old. Working as a waitress at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street, the place smelled perpetually of coffee and bacon grease, and my feet ached by the end of every shift. But I loved the rhythm of it, the way regulars would smile when they saw me, the quarters they'd leave as tips that I'd save in a mason jar under my bed. He walked in around 2 in the afternoon, when the lunch rush had died down and the place was nearly empty except for old Joe reading his newspaper in the corner booth. He was handsome, in a way that made you look twice, not movie star handsome, but real handsome. Strong jaw, dark hair, slicked back, and eyes that seemed to smile, even when his mouth didn't. He wore a suit, which was unusual for our diner. Most of our customers were factory workers or shop owners, people who wore their work on their sleeves. But he sat down at the counter, loosened his tie, and when I came over with the coffee pot, he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. "What's good here?" he asked, and his voice was warm, confident. "Everything, if you're hungry enough," I said, and he laughed. A real laugh, not polite, but genuine. His name was Richard. He told me he'd just gotten a job at Patterson & Associates, a growing accounting firm downtown. He was ambitious, he said. He wanted to make something of himself. He came back the next day, and the day after that, always sitting at the same spot at the counter, always ordering the meatloaf special, always leaving a $1 tip even though his coffee only cost 15 cents. By the third week, he asked me out. By Christmas, we were inseparable. By spring, he proposed with a simple gold band that he'd saved 3 months to buy. We married that June in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with my sister as my witness, and his college roommate as his. I wore a cream-colored dress I'd sewn myself, and he wore his interview suit. And when the judge pronounced us husband and wife, I thought my heart would burst from happiness. Our first apartment was a tiny 4th-floor walk-up with radiators that clanked in winter and windows that stuck in summer. We had a bed, a small kitchen table, 2 chairs, and more love than any palace could hold. Richard would come home from work, and I'd have dinner waiting, nothing fancy, just stew or chicken or whatever I could make stretch on our budget. We'd eat together, talking about our days, making plans for our future. We'd save money, he said. He'd work his way up in the firm. Maybe we'd buy a house someday, have children, build something real. Those early years were simple, but they were ours. We'd walk through the park on Sundays, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. He'd bring me flowers he picked from the community garden, and I'd press them in books to keep forever. When it rained, we'd stay in bed, listening to the water against the windows, wrapped up in each other and in dreams. He called me his angel, his lucky charm, his home, and I believed him with every fiber of my being. I thought love was enough. I thought if you loved someone deeply enough, completely enough, that love would be a shield against everything the world could throw at you. I thought wrong. The change didn't happen overnight. It was so gradual that I didn't see it coming. Like the way you don't notice a tree growing until suddenly it's tall enough to shade your whole yard. Richard started doing well at work, really well. By our 3rd anniversary, he'd been promoted twice. By our 5th, he was being groomed for partner. The money got better. We moved to a nicer apartment, then to a small house in a good neighborhood. I quit my job at the diner because he insisted, said his wife didn't need to work, that he could provide for us both. I should have been happy. We had everything we'd dreamed about in that cramped 4th-floor apartment. But somewhere along the way, in the bigger house with the nicer furniture, I started losing him. He was never home anymore. Morning meetings, late client dinners, weekend golf games with potential investors. His briefcase became a permanent fixture by the door, His suits grew more expensive, his watch more polished. He'd come home at 9, then 10, then midnight, smelling of cigarettes and scotch and sometimes perfume that wasn't mine. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me one-word answers, his eyes already glazing over, his mind somewhere else. "You wouldn't understand, honey," he'd say, when I tried to talk to him about work. "It's complicated business stuff." The affection drained away like water through a sieve. He stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings, stopped holding my hand during the rare dinners we shared. When I'd reach for him in bed, he'd turn away, mumbling about being tired, about a big presentation tomorrow, about stress. The man who once couldn't keep his hands off me now flinched when I touched his shoulder. I told myself it was just the pressure of success. That's what the wives at the company parties said. The other women with their pearl necklaces and practiced smiles. "Men get like this when they're climbing the ladder," they'd whisper over wine. "It's temporary. They come back around." So I waited and made excuses and convinced myself that the distance between us was just a phase, just stress, just the price of the life we were building. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew. You always know, don't you? When someone's heart starts traveling away from yours, you can feel it in the air, in the way they avoid your eyes, in the careful way they phrase their sentences, editing out the truth. The phone calls started around our 7th anniversary. Late at night, his cell would buzz, and he'd step out onto the porch to take them. "Just work," he'd say when he came back in, but his cheeks would be flushed, and his eyes would be bright in a way they never were when he looked at me anymore. Business dinners became more frequent. 3-4 times a week he'd come home after I'd already gone to bed, and in the morning I'd find his suit jacket draped over a chair, reeking of cigarettes and women's perfume. "Is that a new cologne?" I asked once, stupidly, desperately. "What? No, must be from someone at the office. You know how they all wear too much perfume in that place." He laughed it off, but his laugh was hollow, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I started finding things, little things, a receipt for dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant downtown where we'd celebrated our engagement, the one he'd always said was our special place. But this receipt was dated on a Tuesday, and he'd told me he was working late that Tuesday. I'd eaten leftover casserole alone at our kitchen table while he was there, ordering champagne and filet mignon for two. There were other signs, lipstick on his collar that he explained away as a colleague hugging him at someone's birthday party, strange charges on our credit card for jewelry I never received, a weekend business trip to Chicago where I called his hotel room at midnight and no one answered, even though he'd told me he'd be in all evening preparing for his morning meeting. "You're being paranoid," he said, when I finally worked up the courage to mention the Chicago trip. His voice was sharp, annoyed. "What? You don't trust me now? After everything I do for you? I work 60 hours a week to give you this life, and you're going to accuse me of what, exactly?" He was good at that, turning my concerns into my flaws, making me the problem. I was too suspicious, too needy, too insecure. I didn't understand the business world, didn't understand how things worked. He'd look at me with something like pity, like I was a child who couldn't grasp adult concepts, and I'd feel myself shrinking, doubting my own eyes, my own instincts. So I stopped asking. I plastered on smiles and pretended everything was fine. I joined the garden club and volunteered at the library and filled my days with anything that would keep me from thinking about the chasm growing between us. At night, I'd lie next to a man who felt like a stranger and tell myself that love was patient, love was kind, love could weather this storm, but love wasn't blind. Love just didn't want to see. Her name was Melissa. I learned it from a company newsletter that arrived in the mail. There was a photo from their annual retreat in Aspen, a group shot of partners and senior associates on the ski slopes. Richard was in the front row, and next to him, standing so close their ski jackets touched, was a young woman with long blonde hair and a smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. The caption read, "Richard Morrison and Melissa Chen celebrate after a successful strategy session." I studied that photo for an hour, memorizing every detail, the way she leaned into him slightly, the way his hand was positioned just behind her back, not quite touching but claiming, the way they looked like they shared a secret that everyone else in the photo wasn't privy to. I started paying attention, really paying attention. I noticed that her name came up in his conversations more than any other colleague. Melissa had a great idea for the Henderson account. Melissa and I grabbed lunch to go over the numbers. Melissa thinks we should approach it differently. Melissa, Melissa, Melissa. Her name was in our house more than mine was. She was I found her LinkedIn profile one sleepless night, scrolling through my husband's connections while he snored beside me. Columbia MBA, 3 years at Patterson and Associates, specialized in corporate restructuring. Her profile picture showed her in a sharp blazer, confident and polished. She was everything I wasn't anymore. Young where I was aging, career-focused where I was domesticated, exciting where I was familiar. I didn't confront him. Part of me was afraid of what he'd say, but a bigger part was afraid of what he wouldn't say. Afraid of the confirmation, the end of the pretense that we were still a marriage worth saving. So I stayed quiet and watched my husband fall in love with someone else right in front of me. The company hosted a summer gala at the Riverside Hotel, black tie, partners and their spouses. The kind of event where business deals were made over champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. Richard bought me a new dress for the occasion, burgundy silk that cost more than our first month's rent in that fourth-floor apartment. I thought maybe it was a sign, maybe he was trying, maybe he'd remember who we used to be. I should have known better. She was there, of course, Melissa Chen in a black dress that hugged every curve, her hair swept up elegantly, diamond earrings catching the light. I watched her work the room like she owned it, laughing at senior partners' jokes, touching arms, being charming and brilliant and everything a rising star should be. And I watched my husband watch her. He barely spoke to me all night, introduced me to colleagues with a distracted "this is my wife" before moving on to more interesting conversations. But when Melissa entered his orbit, he transformed. Suddenly, he was engaged, laughing, animated in a way I hadn't seen in years. They talked about cases and strategies and office politics, their heads bent close together, and I stood 3 feet away holding a glass of wine, completely invisible. At one point, I excused myself to the ladies' room. When I came back, they were on the balcony, alone. I watched through the glass doors as she touched his arm, as he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh, as they stood there in their own private world while the party continued, inside without them. That's when I knew for certain. It wasn't just my paranoia or insecurity. It wasn't the stress of his job or a rough patch in our marriage. He was in love with her. Maybe they'd crossed physical lines. Maybe they hadn't yet. But emotionally, he'd already left me. I was just the wife at home. The inconvenient piece of his old life that didn't fit the man he was becoming. I cried in the bathroom that night, mascara running down my face, while other women fixed their lipstick and gossiped about whose husband was drinking too much. Then I wiped my eyes, fixed my makeup, and went back out to smile next to my husband, while he pretended I mattered. Things got worse after the gala. Richard stopped even trying to hide it. He'd text her at the dinner table, right in front of me, his phone lighting up with her name. When I'd ask who he was texting, he'd say just work, without bothering to make it sound convincing. Weekends disappeared. Every Saturday and Sunday there was suddenly urgent business strategy sessions that couldn't wait, client emergencies that required his immediate attention. I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, the Westin, a Saturday night, 3 weeks after the gala, room service for 2, champagne, late checkout on Sunday. He'd told me he was at a conference in Philadelphia. The Westin was 15 minutes from our house. My hands shook as I held that receipt. This was it. This was proof. I could confront him now, throw it in his face, demand the truth, but I didn't. I folded it carefully and put it in my jewelry box, underneath the box that held my wedding ring from our courthouse ceremony. I was collecting evidence like it mattered, like I was building a case, but really I was just hoarding pieces of my broken heart. I started losing weight, not from trying but from the knot in my stomach that made eating impossible. Friends commented on how thin I'd gotten, how tired I looked. "Is everything okay?" they'd ask, and I'd smile and say Richard was just working so hard. We were both so busy. The lies came easily. I'd been practicing them on myself for so long that saying them out loud felt natural. At night, when he'd finally come home, I'd pretend to be asleep. I'd hear him in the bathroom, showering off her perfume. And I'd lie there with my eyes closed, wondering how we'd ended up here, wondering if he ever thought about those early days, about the girl who'd served him coffee, and the boy who'd left dollar tips, wondering if any of it had been real, or if I'd just been convenient. A stepping stone to the life he really wanted. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Isn't it strange how Tuesdays keep appearing in my story? The day we met was a Tuesday. The day everything shattered was a Tuesday too. Maybe there's no such thing as an ordinary day. Maybe every single one holds the potential to change everything. He came home at midnight, drunk. I could tell from the way his keys rattled in the door, from his heavy footsteps in the hallway. I was in the living room, still dressed, having given up on sleep hours ago. I'd been sitting there in the dark, just thinking, trying to figure out when exactly I'd become someone who waited up like this, anxious and small. "You're still up," he said. And there was accusation in his voice, like my wakefulness was an inconvenience to him. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice was steady. Calm. I'd asked this question 100 times before in 100 different ways, always backing down when he pushed back. "Not tonight. Out. Work, dinner. Until midnight. It ran late. Look, I'm tired. I don't want to do this right now." He moved toward the stairs, but I stood up, blocking his path. Something in me had shifted. Maybe it was all the evidence I'd collected, all the lies I'd swallowed, all the nights I'd spent diminishing myself to make room for his betrayal. Maybe I'd just finally had enough. "Who's Melissa?" I asked. He froze. For just a second, I saw panic flash across his face before he schooled it into annoyance. "What? Melissa Chen, your colleague, the one you spent the entire gala with, the one you text constantly, the one whose name is all over our credit card statements. Who is she to you?" "She's a coworker." "Jesus Christ, what is this? Are you seriously doing this right now?" "I found the receipt, the Saturday you said you were in Philadelphia." His face changed. The pretense dropped away, and what was left was ugly, cold. He looked at me like I was something that had gotten in his way, an obstacle to remove. "So what?" he said. "So what if I was with her? What are you going to do about it?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected denial. I'd expected more lies. I hadn't expected him to just admit it, to throw it in my face with such casual cruelty. "How long?" I whispered. "Does it matter? 6 months? A year? What difference does it make? I'm your wife." He laughed, and it was the ugliest sound I'd ever heard. "You're my wife," he repeated mockingly. "And what does that mean anymore? You sit in this house all day doing nothing. You have no career, no ambitions, no interests. You're just ... here, taking up space, waiting for me to come home and pay attention to you like some kind of needy child." Each word was a knife. I felt them cutting through years of marriage, through memories of who we used to be, through every promise he'd ever made. "She gets me," he continued, his voice rising. "She understands my work, my goals. She's smart and driven and ambitious. She's going somewhere. And you're exactly the same person you were when I met you, a waitress playing housewife." "You asked me to quit my job," I said, my voice barely audible. "You said you wanted to take care of me." "Yeah, well, I didn't know you'd just stop being a person entirely. You've gotten boring. This marriage is boring. You want to know the truth. Fine. I'm in love with her. I've been in love with her for months. And the only reason I'm still here is because divorce is expensive and complicated. And I don't have time to deal with that right now." I stood there, trying to process what he was saying. This was the man who'd proposed on one knee with tears in his eyes, the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death did us part. And now he was telling me I was an inconvenience he hadn't gotten around to disposing of yet. "Get out of my way," he said, moving to push past me. I didn't move. "No." "Excuse me," I said. "No. We're going to talk about this. You don't get to just..." He shoved me, not hard enough to knock me down, but hard enough to make me stumble backward, hard enough to make his point. "Don't," he said, and his voice was low, dangerous. "Don't push me right now. I've had a long day. I've been drinking, and I don't want to deal with your hysterics." Hysterics. I felt something breaking open inside me. "You've been cheating on me for a year, and I'm being hysterical. You're being pathetic, standing there with that wounded look, like you didn't see this coming. Please. You've known for months. You just didn't want to admit it because then you'd have to do something about it, and doing something would require you to actually have a backbone." I slapped him. My hand moved before my brain could catch up, connecting with his cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the room. For a moment, we both just stared at each other, shocked. Then he hit me back. Not with his fist, but with the back of his hand, across my face. The force of it knocked me sideways, and I felt my lips split, tasted blood. I touched my mouth, staring at the red on my fingers, unable to process what had just happened. "Look what you made me do," he said, and his voice was shaking. "This is what happens when you push, when you can't just leave things alone." I looked up at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt something inside me die. Not love, because love had been dying for months, bleeding out slowly with every lie and betrayal. No, what died in that moment was hope. the hope that somehow we could fix this, that somewhere underneath all the anger and resentment was the man I'd married. He was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed at all. "Get out," he said. "Get out of my house. I can't even look at you right now." "This is my house too," I said, but my voice was weak, trembling. "It's my name on the deed, my money that paid for it, my house, my rules, and I'm telling you to get the hell out." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise, and dragged me toward the front door. I stumbled after him, too shocked to fight back, too broken to resist. He threw the door open, and the cold night air rushed in. "Wait," I said. "Let me get my phone, my purse. You can get your shit tomorrow. Right now, I want you gone." He pushed me out onto the porch. I turned back, reaching for the door, but he slammed it in my face. I heard the lock click, then silence. I stood there in my nightgown and bare feet, the October cold seeping into my bones. It was 1 a.m. The street was dark and empty. Our neighbors' houses were all dark, everyone asleep in their warm beds, living their normal lives, unaware that mine had just shattered into pieces on this quiet suburban porch. I knocked on the door, softly at first, then harder. "Richard, please, please open the door. I'm sorry I hit you. Please, just let me in. We can talk about this in the morning. Please." Nothing. No sound from inside. No lights turning on. He was done with me. I sat down on the porch steps, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to stop shaking. I'd lived in this house for 3 years. I'd planted the flowers in the garden. I'd painted the kitchen yellow because it made me happy. I'd made it a home, our home, and now I was locked out of it like an intruder. The wedding ring on my finger caught the moonlight, just like it had on the day he'd slipped it on. I twisted it around and around, this symbol of promises broken, of a life I'd thought was mine but never really was. I should take it off, I thought. I should throw it into the bushes and walk away and never look back, but I didn't. I sat there on those cold steps, shivering and crying and feeling sorry for myself, until the sky started turning gray with dawn. A car drove past around 5 a.m., slowing down. The driver, an older man heading to an early shift, rolled down his window and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. Just locked out. My husband would be up soon. He looked uncertain but drove on. What else could he do? How do you help someone who's pretending not to need help? When the sun came up fully, I finally stood. My legs were numb. My feet were cut from standing on the rough concrete, and my face ached where he'd hit me. I walked to my sister's house 6 blocks away, still in my nightgown, still barefoot, looking like exactly what I was, a woman with nowhere else to go. She took one look at me and pulled me inside, wrapping me in a blanket, making me tea, not asking questions until I was ready to answer them. When I finally told her what happened, she cried with me. Then she got angry. "You're pressing charges," she said. "He can't just hit you and throw you out. We're calling the police." But I didn't. I couldn't face it. Couldn't face the questions and the looks and the pity. I couldn't face seeing him again, hearing him make excuses, watching him minimize what he'd done. All I wanted was to disappear. To go somewhere he'd never find me, to become someone new who didn't carry all this pain. So that's exactly what I did. I stayed with my sister for a week while I made plans. Richard never called, never came looking for me. When I went back to the house while he was at work to get my clothes, I found he'd already moved her in. Her makeup was in the bathroom, her clothes in the closet. He'd replaced me before my side of the bed was even cold. I took what was mine, which wasn't much. Most of our life together had been built with his money, his choices. I loaded my old car with boxes of clothes, some books, my grandmother's quilt, and the jar of pressed flowers from our early years. Everything else I left behind. Let him have it. Let them have it. Material things didn't matter anymore. I drove 3 hours north to a small town I'd visited once on a childhood vacation. Millbrook, population 8,000. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the pace was slow and the expectations were simple. I rented a tiny studio apartment above a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread would wake me every morning, a small comfort in my new life. I needed work. I was 34 years old with no recent job experience and a resume that stopped 10 years ago. But the local accounting firm was looking for a secretary, and the owner, a kind woman named Martha who reminded me of my mother, hired me despite my gaps. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said. I didn't tell her I was really looking for a first chance, a chance to be someone other than Richard Morrison's discarded wife. The work was simple at first, answering phones, filing, organizing, but I paid attention. I watched how Martha handled clients, how she structured contracts, how she built trust. I asked questions. I stayed late. I learned. At night, in my small apartment, I taught myself advanced Excel, bookkeeping, basic accounting principles. I took online courses with the little money I had saved. I read every business book in the local library. I was hungry for knowledge, for skills, for anything that would make me valuable, make me powerful, make me never dependent on a man again. But I was also learning other things, things I never intended to learn. The accounting world is small, even in different towns. Firms talk to each other, share clients, swap information, and Martha's firm had occasionally worked with Patterson and Associates, Richard's company. Not often, but enough that news traveled. 6 months after I'd left, Martha came into the office buzzing with gossip. Patterson and Associates was having serious problems, financial irregularities, money missing from client accounts. An internal investigation was underway. I listened carefully, my heart beating faster. I didn't say anything about my connection to the firm, to Richard. I just absorbed the information like a sponge. Over the next few months, I pieced together what was happening through bits of office gossip and public business filings. Melissa Chen, the brilliant rising star, had been skimming money, small amounts at first, from dormant accounts that no one checked regularly, then bigger amounts as she grew bolder. She'd covered her tracks well, routing money through offshore accounts, creating false documentation. She'd been doing it for over a year, funding a lifestyle beyond what her salary could support. And Richard, so in love, so distracted, had signed off on transactions without his usual scrutiny. He'd trusted her completely. In his obsession with her, he'd become sloppy, careless. When the audit came, his signature was on half the questionable documents. The firm suspended him pending investigation. They froze his assets, questioned his competence, destroyed his reputation. Other partners distanced themselves, protecting their own interests. Clients left in droves, unwilling to trust a firm mired in scandal. And Melissa, she disappeared, took what money she could and vanished before the investigation could catch up to her. Left Richard holding the bag, facing potential criminal charges, his career in ruins. I learned all this from newspaper articles and business journals, reading them in my apartment at night with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication. He was getting exactly what he deserved, wasn't he? Karma was serving him the same betrayal he'd served me. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of anger, tired of hurt, tired of letting him occupy space in my head. I focused on my own life instead. I'd been working at Martha's firm for 2 years when she offered me a junior accountant position. "You've learned faster than anyone I've ever trained," she told me. "You have a real talent for this." I threw myself into the work. I built relationships with clients, earned their trust through competence and honesty. I learned the delicate art of managing other people's money with integrity, something Richard had forgotten how to do. One of my clients, Mr. Peterson, owned a small manufacturing company. He was in his 60s, looking to retire, drowning in paperwork and outdated systems. I helped him reorganize his finances, digitize his records, identify wastes. Within 6 months, his profit margins had increased by 15%. "You've saved my business," he told me. "What would it take to hire you, full-time? I need someone like you running the business side while I focus on production." It was a generous offer, but I had a different idea. What if I started my own consulting firm? I could work with you and help other small businesses like yours. There are dozens of them in this area struggling with the same issues. His eyes lit up. "I'll be your first client, and I'll recommend you to everyone I know." That's how Morrison Consulting was born. Yes, I kept his last name, not because I wanted to hold on to him, but because changing it legally would have cost money I didn't have. And besides, I'd earned that name through years of pain. It was mine now, redeemed through my own work. I started small, 1 office, 1 desk, 1 computer, and a business plan I'd written at 2 a.m., fueled by determination and cheap coffee. I specialized in helping small businesses improve their financial systems, particularly those run by women and minorities who'd been overlooked by larger firms. I charged fair rates and delivered real results. Word spread. Within a year, I had 12 steady clients. Within 2 years, I hired 2 employees. Then we moved to a larger office. I invested in better software, professional development, marketing. The business grew steadily, built on a foundation of genuine service and trustworthiness. I wasn't getting rich, but I was comfortable. More importantly, I was respected. People sought my advice. They valued my opinion. They trusted me with their livelihoods. Everything Richard had said, I could never be ambitious driven. Successful I was becoming, despite him. No, because of him. His betrayal had burned away the parts of me that were weak and uncertain, leaving behind something stronger. Meanwhile, Richard's world continued its collapse. Patterson and Associates dissolved entirely. The investigation concluded that, while Richard wasn't criminally liable, his negligence had enabled Melissa's theft. No charges were filed, but his reputation was destroyed. No firm would hire him. Clients wouldn't work with him. His name, once associated with success, became synonymous with scandal and carelessness. I heard through the professional grapevine that he'd tried to start his own practice, but couldn't get clients. He'd burned through his savings, sold the house at a loss, moved to a small apartment. The man who'd built his identity on his career success watched it all crumble while I, the boring housewife he'd discarded, built something real from nothing. For years after that night on the porch, I was sitting in my office reviewing contracts when my assistant buzzed me. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. His name is Richard Morrison." My heart stopped. For 4 years, I'd imagined this moment. Sometimes in my imagination I was cold and powerful, dismissing him with a wave of my hand. Sometimes I was angry, unleashing years of hurt in a righteous tirade. Sometimes I simply turned him away without a word. But sitting there in my real office, with my real life humming along successfully around me, I felt none of those things. I just felt tired. "Give me 5 minutes," I told my assistant. "Then send him in." I used those 5 minutes to breathe, to center myself, to remember who I was now. Not the broken woman who'd sat on the porch that night, not the discarded wife who'd fled to a new town. I was strong, now, successful, independent. He couldn't hurt me anymore. When my door opened and he walked in, I barely recognized him. The confident, polished man I'd married was gone. In his place was someone smaller, somehow older, worn down by failure and regret. His suit was off the rack and slightly rumpled. His hair was graying and thinning. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 4. "Hello, Richard," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hi." He stood awkwardly in the middle of my office, taking in the framed certificates on the wall, the photos of my team, the evidence of my success. "You've done well. Thank you. What can I do for you?" He flinched at the professional coolness in my tone. I wanted to talk to you, to apologize. You could have called. Would you have answered?" "No," he nodded, accepting that. "I've made so many mistakes. The worst one was losing you, hurting you. That night, what I did, there's no excuse for it. I waited. I'd learned the power of silence, of letting people fill it with their own discomfort. Melissa took everything," he continued, "my career, my reputation, my money. She played me perfectly. I was so stupid, so arrogant. I thought, I don't know what I thought. That success meant I deserved to have everything I wanted. That you were somehow holding me back from being the man I was supposed to be. But you weren't holding me back. You were the only real thing I had, and I threw you away." He sat down without being invited, and I saw how exhausted he was, how defeated. Part of me, a small part, felt a flicker of pity, but I'd learned that pity wasn't the same as obligation. "I lost my practice," he said, "lost everything. I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment, working contract jobs when I can find them. Most firms won't touch me. My name is poison in the industry." He laughed bitterly. "The irony is, I kept your last name too. Morrison, the name that used to open doors now closes them. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I need help." The words came out rushed, desperate. "I heard you're doing well, that you have a successful consulting firm. I thought maybe you could use someone with my experience. I'd work for you, whatever position you have available. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm asking anyway. I'm begging." There it was. After 4 years, he'd come back, not out of love or genuine remorse, but because he needed something from me, because I was useful again. I looked at this man who'd once been my whole world, who'd promised me forever and delivered betrayal, who'd struck me and thrown me out and replaced me without a second thought, and I felt ... nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity anymore. Just a vast emptiness where he used to live inside my heart. "No," I said simply. "Please, I know I hurt you, but Richard..." I cut him off, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. I forgave you a long time ago, not because you deserved it, but because carrying that anger was poisoning me, I let it go so I could move forward. Hope flickered in his eyes, but I held up my hand. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean I owe you anything. You made your choices, and they had consequences. Those consequences aren't my responsibility to fix. I was wrong about you, he said quietly. You're not boring or aimless. You're incredible. You built all of this from nothing. You're everything I said you weren't. No, Richard, I was always this person. You just couldn't see it because you were too busy looking at your own reflection. And honestly, I couldn't see it either. I'd made myself small to fit into your life, to be the wife you said you wanted. You throwing me out was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to find out who I really was. So there's no chance, no way I can make this right. I shook my head. Making it right isn't about you working for me or me saving you from your mistakes. You need to rebuild your own life on your own terms, just like I did. He stood slowly, understanding that this conversation was over. At the door, he paused. Do you ever think about what we had, the good times, before everything went wrong? I considered the question honestly, sometimes, but those memories belong to two different people. We're not those people anymore. Can I ask you one more thing? What are you happy? I thought about my small apartment that smelled like fresh bread in the mornings, about my team of employees who trusted me and learned from me, about my clients who valued my work, about the life I'd built with my own hands, brick by brick, from the rubble of my broken marriage. Yes, I said. I am, he nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. Good, that's good. You deserve to be happy. I'm sorry I couldn't be the one to make you that way. After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing what had just happened. I'd thought I'd feel triumphant, seeing him brought low while I'd risen. But instead, I just felt sad for both of us, for the time we'd wasted, for the people we'd hurt, including ourselves. My assistant knocked softly. Are you okay? Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I'm okay. That night, I drove home to my apartment, picked up dinner from the Thai place on Main Street, and ate while watching the sunset from my small balcony. It wasn't a grand life, no mansion, no luxury car, no status symbols, just a quiet existence built on honest work and self-respect. A few months after Richard's visit, something unexpected happened. The universe, it seemed, wasn't quite done with either of us. I was having lunch with Martha, who'd become not just a mentor but a dear friend, when she mentioned that she'd run into someone from my past. This man came into the office looking for bookkeeping help, small business owner, furniture restoration, and when I saw his intake form, I noticed he was from your hometown. My stomach dropped. Richard Morrison. No, someone named James Peterson. Said he grew up in the same neighborhood as you, even remembered you from high school. Nice man, quiet. His business is struggling a bit, but I think with the right financial guidance, he could turn it around. James Peterson, the name stirred something in my memory. Tall kid, always drawing in the margins of his notebooks. He'd sat behind me in English class, occasionally helping me with homework. We'd been friendly but never close. I'd barely thought about him in 20 years. He asked about you, actually, Martha continued. Asked if you were the same girl from Riverside Drive. I hope it was okay, but I told him you worked with me. He seemed pleased to hear you were doing well. 2 weeks later, James came in for his consultation. I almost didn't recognize him. The gangly teenager had become a solid man with kind eyes and calloused hands. His furniture restoration business was his passion. He showed me photos of pieces he'd brought back to life, and I could see the artistry in his work. I always knew you'd do something important, he said during our meeting, surprising me. Even in high school, you had this quiet determination, like you were waiting for your moment. I was just trying to get through high school, I said, laughing. No, it was more than that. I remember when Tommy Blake was bullying Sarah Chen, and you stood up to him even though he was twice your size. You got detention for it, but you didn't care. You did what was right. I'd forgotten about that, forgotten a lot of things about who I used to be, before I'd molded myself into Richard's ideal wife. Over the next few months, James and I worked together on his business finances. He was a hard worker who'd been making decisions based on passion rather than practical business sense. We restructured his pricing, identified his most profitable services, and developed a marketing strategy. His business began to stabilize, then to grow. We also talked about our lives, our failures, our hopes. He'd been married briefly, to his college girlfriend. They'd divorced amicably when they realized they wanted different things. He'd never remarried, had thrown himself into his craft instead. I think I was afraid, he admitted one evening when we'd stayed late to finish his quarterly review, afraid of getting hurt again. So I just didn't try. I understand that, I said. After my divorce, I couldn't imagine ever trusting someone again. He looked surprised. I assumed you were still married. You still wear your ring. I looked down at the gold band I'd never taken off. Force of habit, I guess. Or maybe a reminder of what I survived, what I overcame. The next day, I finally slipped the ring off my finger. It left a faint indent in my skin, a ghost of what had been. I put it in my desk drawer, not thrown away but no longer worn. Some chapters need to close completely before new ones can begin. James and I started having dinner together after our business meetings. Nothing romantic at first, just two old acquaintances reconnecting. But slowly, carefully, something else began to grow. He made me laugh. He listened when I talked. He treated me like an equal, like someone whose opinion mattered. I'm scared, I told Martha one day. What if I'm making another mistake? Or what if you're not? She replied gently, not every man is Richard. And you're not that same woman anymore either. You know who you are now. You know what you won't accept. She was right. I'd learned to recognize red flags, to trust my instincts, to walk away when something didn't feel right. I'd learned that being alone was better than being with someone who diminished me. James was patient. He never pushed, never demanded. When I told him about Richard, about the abuse and betrayal, he listened without judgment. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said, but I'm grateful it led you here. That's selfish, I know, but I'm grateful anyway. A year later, he proposed, not in a grand gesture, but in his workshop, surrounded by half-restored furniture and the smell of wood polish. I know you don't need me, he said. You've built a beautiful life on your own, but I'd like to be part of it, if you'll have me. As partners, equals. I said yes, not because I needed saving or because I was afraid of being alone, but because I wanted him in my life, because he made my good days better and my hard days easier, because he saw me as I really was and loved what he saw. We married at the courthouse, just like Richard and I had all those years ago, but this time felt completely different. This time, I wasn't a young girl chasing a fairy tale. I was a woman who knew exactly what she was choosing and why. My business continued to grow. James's business flourished. We bought a small house together. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. We made decisions together. We supported each other's dreams. We built a life based on truth rather than illusion. I heard through the grapevine that Richard had eventually found work at a small firm in another state. Starting over from the bottom, I hoped he'd found some peace, learned some lessons, but his journey was no longer my concern. One evening, 5 years after that night on the porch, I was going through old boxes and found the pressed flowers from my first marriage, the roses Richard had picked from the community garden, brown and brittle now, crumbling at the edges. I looked at them for a long time. These relics from a different life. James found me there, sitting on the floor surrounded by memories. You okay? Yeah, I said, just thinking about how much has changed. Do you regret any of it? The pain, the betrayal? Of course, but I don't regret where it led me. I don't regret becoming who I am now. What are you going to do with those? He nodded at the flowers. I thought about keeping them, about holding on to the past, but some things are meant to be released, not preserved. I think I'm going to let them go. We buried them in our garden, in a corner where new flowers would bloom in spring, a funeral for my old life, a blessing for my new one. That night, I started writing down my story, not for publication, or for revenge, but for myself, for any woman who might need to hear it, who might be sitting on a cold porch at 1 a.m., wondering if she'll survive what comes next. I wanted her to know, you will survive. You'll do more than survive. You'll discover strength you didn't know you had. You'll build a life that's truly yours. And one day you'll look back at the worst night of your life and realize it was also a beginning. Years passed. Good years. My consulting firm expanded to 3 offices across the state. I spoke at conferences, mentored young women starting their own businesses, served on the boards of nonprofits supporting domestic violence survivors. I used my story not as a badge of victimhood but as proof of resilience. James and I never had children. We talked about it, but decided our life was full enough as it was. We had our work, our friends, our community. We traveled when we could, nothing extravagant. Just road trips to see the country, staying in small towns and eating at local diners. Somehow I'd come full circle to those early days, but with wisdom earned through fire. I saw Richard one more time, about 10 years after our divorce. I was giving a keynote speech at a business conference in the city, talking about building ethical companies from the ground up. He was in the audience, sitting in the back row. Our eyes met briefly, and he nodded acknowledgement, perhaps, or respect. I nodded back, then continued my speech. After the presentation, he didn't approach me, and I was grateful for that. We'd said everything we needed to say years ago. There was nothing left between us but history and the faint scars of lessons learned. My sister called me one winter evening, her voice excited. Did you see the article in the Business Journal? They're profiling you as one of the top entrepreneurs in the state. I'd known about the interview but hadn't seen the published piece. She read it to me over the phone, and I barely recognized myself in the glowing description. Self-made businesswoman, champion of small businesses, role model for women in finance. I'm so proud of you, my sister said, and I could hear her crying. After everything you went through, look at what you've built. That night, James and I sat on our porch, much warmer, more welcoming porch than the one from my nightmares. We drank wine and watched the stars and didn't need to talk much. We'd reached that comfortable place where silence was companionship, not absence. Do you ever wonder, I asked eventually, what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices? Sure, he said, but I try not to dwell on it. The choices we made, good and bad, led us here, and here is pretty good. It was more than pretty good. It was real, honest, built on a foundation that could weather storms because it was made of substance, not illusion. I thought about the young woman I'd been, serving coffee at Murphy's Diner, believing that love was enough to build a life on. She'd been naive but not stupid, hopeful but not foolish. She'd deserved better than what she got. But she'd survived it and become someone stronger. I thought about the wife I'd been, making herself smaller and smaller to fit into someone else's vision, losing herself piece by piece until there was almost nothing left. She'd been broken but not destroyed, and in her breaking, she'd found the truth about who she really was. And I thought about the woman I'd become, built from the ashes of my old life, successful, yes, but more importantly, authentic. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. I didn't diminish myself for anyone. I knew my worth, and I demanded that others respect it too. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Richard's rejection, his cruelty, his betrayal, all the things that were meant to destroy me had actually freed me. He'd thrown me out thinking he was discarding something worthless, but really, he'd released me from a cage I'd been living in so long, I'd forgotten it was a cage at all. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless, that forgiveness is for your own peace, not for reconciliation with those who hurt you, that you can survive anything if you're willing to let go of who you thought you were and discover who you really are. And I'd learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to us are preparing us for the best things we haven't met yet. Martha retired the year I turned 50, and I bought her firm, merging it with mine. We threw her a party at the community center, and the whole town came out. Martha had given me a chance when I had nothing, had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Now I could carry on her legacy, giving other people those same chances. At the party, I gave a toast. Martha once told me that everyone deserves a second chance. She gave me mine when I desperately needed it. This firm will continue her mission, will be a place where people can rebuild, restart, and discover what they're capable of. Because I'm living proof that your worst day doesn't have to define your story. It can be just the beginning of a better chapter. The room erupted in applause, and I saw women in the crowd crying, women who knew what I'd been through, who'd had their own versions of that cold night, that locked door, that moment of complete helplessness. My story had given them hope, shown them a path forward. That's when I understood the real purpose of my pain, not just to make me stronger, though it had done that, but to light the way for others walking through their own darkness, to be proof that you can fall apart completely and still rebuild something beautiful. I started a foundation that year, using profits from my business to provide small business loans to women leaving abusive relationships. No credit check, no judgment, just a chance to start over. We called it Second Chapter, and within 2 years, we'd helped 43 women start their own businesses. 43 women who'd been told they were worthless, who'd been diminished and discarded, now running successful companies and supporting themselves and their children. Each one of them was me, 20 years ago, sitting on that porch, and each one of them was who I'd become: resilient, determined, unstoppable. James and I talked about my work one evening, sitting in his workshop while he restored an old oak table someone had thrown away, seeing value where others saw only trash. "Do you think Richard knows," he asked, "about everything you've built, everything you've accomplished?" "Probably," I said. "The business world is small, but I don't do this for him to see. I don't do it to prove him wrong, though I suppose I have. I do it because it's who I am, who I was always meant to be." "He was a fool to lose you." "He was a fool," I agreed. "But I was a fool too, for a while, for believing that his opinion of me mattered more than my opinion of myself, for letting him define my worth. I can't blame him for everything. I participated in my own diminishment. But you learned, I learned." I smiled. "And I learned to teach others what I learned. That's worth more than revenge ever could be." I'm 72 now, writing this story for you, my dears, wherever you are in this world. James passed away 3 years ago, peacefully in his sleep, and I miss him every day. But I'm not afraid of being alone. I know how to be my own companion now, how to find joy in my own company. My business is in good hands, run by women I trained. Women who understand that success without integrity is just another form of poverty. The foundation continues to grow, helping more women each year find their second chapters. I never saw Richard again after that conference. I heard, some years back, that he'd remarried, had a daughter, was working as a professor at a small college, teaching business ethics, of all things. I hope he found peace. I hope he became a better man, but his journey stopped being my concern long ago. What I want you to understand, you who are listening to this old woman's voice, is that your worst moment is not your defining moment unless you let it be. That night when Richard threw me out at 1 a.m. could have been the end of my story. I could have let it break me permanently, could have spent the rest of my life bitter and diminished, defined by what was done to me, but I chose differently, and that choice, that decision to rebuild rather than surrender, made all the difference. If you're in a relationship where you feel small, where your dreams are dismissed, where your worth is questioned, I know it's not easy. I know it's terrifying. I know you've invested years, emotions, promises, but I also know that staying will cost you more than leaving ever could. It will cost you yourself, and if you've already been thrown out, if you're sitting on your own cold porch wondering how you'll survive this, let me tell you, you will not just survive, you will thrive. You will discover strengths you didn't know you had. You will build a life that's truly yours. And one day you'll look back at this night and realize it wasn't an ending at all. It was freedom. Love shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't diminish. It shouldn't make you question your worth or silence your voice. Real love builds you up, stands beside you as an equal, celebrates your successes, and supports your dreams. Anything less than that isn't love, it's just chains with a prettier name. I forgave Richard not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. Forgiveness was my gift to myself, my way of refusing to let him occupy any more space in my heart. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean reconciling. It didn't mean pretending what happened was okay. It just meant I was choosing to move forward rather than stay trapped in the past. The truth is, Richard throwing me out that night was the best thing he ever did for me. Though I couldn't see it at the time, he forced me to discover who I was without him, to build a life based on my own strength rather than his approval. He set me free, though freedom was the last thing he intended to give me. I've lived a good life, a full life, a life with purpose and meaning and connection. I've loved and been loved. I've failed and succeeded. I've helped people and been helped in return. I've made mistakes and learned from them. I've been broken and rebuilt myself stronger. And I've learned that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. If that relationship is strong, if you know your worth and refuse to accept less than you deserve, then everything else falls into place. But if you don't love yourself, if you don't respect yourself, then no amount of external love will ever be enough. So love yourself first, respect yourself first, choose yourself first, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And you can't build a healthy relationship on a foundation of self-neglect. Richard taught me that lesson. Though he didn't mean to, he showed me what happens when you abandon yourself for someone else, when you make yourself small to fit into someone else's life. And in teaching me that lesson, he inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of all. He gave me back to myself. That's the real story, my dears, not revenge, though there's a certain poetry in how things worked out. Not even about forgiveness, though that was part of the journey. The real story is about a woman who lost everything and discovered that everything she needed was inside her all along. It's 1 a.m. on a cold October night, and a woman is standing on a porch, locked out of her home, her marriage, her old life. She's shivering and crying and feeling like the world has ended. But the world hasn't ended. It's just beginning. She doesn't know it yet, but that locked door is opening onto a life beyond her wildest dreams. A life where she's strong and successful and respected. A life where she helps other women find their own strength. A life where she's loved the way she always deserved to be loved, as an equal, as a partner, as someone valuable and important. That woman was me. And if you're standing on your own cold porch tonight, wondering how you'll survive this, I'm here to tell you, that woman is also you. Your second chapter is waiting. Your strength is waiting. Your real life is waiting. All you have to do is take the first step forward. Thank you for listening to this old grandma's story, my dears. Thank you for letting me share the lessons I learned through pain and transformed into wisdom. Remember to be kind to yourselves. Remember that you deserve respect and love and partnership. Remember that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, to become who you were always meant to be. And remember that the door that slams in your face might just be the universe pushing you toward the door that's meant to open for you. Until next time, my loves, keep moving forward, keep choosing yourself, keep believing that better days are ahead, because they are. They absolutely are.